What is the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life that you can't explain? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. When I was a child, both my parents went to work early, so they would drop me off at my grandmother's to eat breakfast and go to school from there. My grandmother died my junior year in high school, and I started coming straight home from school. During this time, my mother started complaining that when she get home from work, the receiver of the phone, an 80s-style corded push-button phone next to her bed, was left off the base. I wasn't using the phone, but she would insist I must have because the phone was hung up properly when she left for work. One day, I got home a little early. Now, I need to pause and tell you about the layout of our apartment. From the front door, I looked directly into the living room, dining room, the door to the kitchen, and the short halfway that led to my parents' bedroom and my bedroom. There was no other door. The windows were old-fashioned, narrow casement windows with screens, and we were on the 3rd floor. Anyway, as soon as I walked in the door, I clearly heard 2 footsteps in my parents' bedroom. I dropped my school bag and foolishly ran to the bedroom. It wasn't far and took only a few seconds. I got to the bedroom, and no one was there. However, I immediately noticed that the receiver of the phone on my mother's bedside table was on the floor. It was placed so that the cord to the base was stretched out as far as it could go. I later tried to replicate the placement by shaking the table, tipping the phone, etc. I could never get the receiver off the base. When I finally resorted to knocking it off with a finger, it would fall on the table or next to it. The only way I could replicate the placement of the receiver where I found it was to carefully stretch the cord, place it, and hold it for a few moments. It could not have gotten to that spot by accident. When I found the phone, I hung it up, and it immediately rang. I answered it, and it was my dad. He asked what was wrong. I asked him why he asked. He said he had called, apparently just before I got home, and someone, he thought it was me, answered the phone but never said anything. He finally hung up and had been trying to call back and only got through after I hung up the phone. I've never figured out what happened. I definitely heard footsteps, and I'm just as certain there was no one there. No one went by me. The windows in the bedroom were not disturbed, and my parents had too much stuff under the bed and in the closet for anyone bigger than an infant to hide in either spot. Also, after this, my mother never found the phone disturbed again. Answer: my mom had similar stuff happen to her with phones just after her grandma died. Something in particular which she never forgot was that her house phone would often receive calls from her grandma's old telephone number, and if she answered, it'd just be silence. She called it back a couple times, but the line was disconnected. Unsure if there's an explanation, but unsettling for sure. Story 2. I have one story, though. I can explain it. I used to work as a security guard for an office building. Every once in a while, I'd do my rounds. Building would be completely empty except for me. Then I'd sit at the security desk and watch the cameras. But then the CFO would suddenly appear on the cameras. On the 1st floor, he would literally just appear in his office. Even after I had checked his office was empty, he'd walk around the 1st floor for a bit, go back to his office, and completely disappear again. I'd go around the 1st floor, but I'd never see him in person. I'd only ever see him on the cameras. Used to scare the shoot out of me. I ended up recording the CCTV and showed the security supervisor it, which led to HR questioning him about sneaking into the office after dark. Turned out, behind some filing cabinets in his office, there was this little hatch door which led to this vertical passageway with a ladder that was connected to the basement. Guy got divorced the month before lost the house. He was living in that tiny passageway with a sleeping bag. Story 3. I've seen some pretty wild stuff in my life, but most of it is explainable. The one event that comes to mind was witnessed by my dad, brother, and myself, and it's a 2-part encounter, but I still consider it one event. This is a bit long, and I apologize, but I feel it might be worth the read. It was around 1998. My family and I had just moved into an old clapboard house on the edge of town. It had a huge backyard with a 6-foot wooden privacy fence on one side and a metal chain link fence about 4.5 feet high around the other 3 sides of the yard. Neighbors on one side, the privacy fence side, a small grass alley that ran behind the back with a street light, and then another yard, etc. Our bedroom was an old converted sunroom on the back of the house that faces the backyard. It had floor-to-ceiling windows all along the back wall looking into the backyard. We didn't have many options as to where to place our beds, so my headboard was against the windows, and my brother's bed was about 8 feet away, with his headboard against the opposite wall with the foot of the bed facing the windows. One night we were up pretty late. I was in my bed, and he was in his just talking about random things when suddenly he got quiet. I figured he fell asleep, but then I heard him whispering in a shaky breath. So I'm like, what? And I hear him whisper again. So again, I'm like, speak up, I can't hear you. And he goes, "Don't move and be quiet," in a forced whisper. But I, thinking he's messing with me, and like, "Meanie, why?" And I'm looking at him, and mind you, my head is to the windows, and he's pointing into the backyard behind my bed. So quickly, sit up and turn around and see this huge dog head staring almost nose to glass through the window right behind my bed. I'm almost nose to nose with this thing. Just a single pane of glass and about 10 inches of empty air separate me for this thing. Now, when I say I screamed, I mean I screamed. Not my proudest moment, but hey, I was like 10 years old. Well, anyways, the thing quickly ducked under the window and then ran to the side of the yard and jumped the 4.5-foot chain link fence and bolted off into the darkness. My dad came running into the room with our mom right on his heels. We were able to get out that something was looking through our window. So Dad ran back to his room and grabbed his shotgun and then headed out the side door of the house and into the backyard. Unfortunately, or fortunately, IDK, he didn't find anything. Wrote it off as I had a nightmare and my brother wouldn't admit to seeing anything. So I took the blame and was told to quit messing around, go back to bed, typical parent response, etc. Well, later that night, maybe an hour or so, after I begged my parents to let me sleep in the living room because leaving the house wasn't an option and still being refused, I was made to sleep in my room. So again, my brother and I are in our room with these floor-to-ceiling windows. We are just completely rattled. We are both huddled in his bed, staring out the windows, when we see this thing come walking along the chain link fence on all fours, and the fence only comes up to its mid-shoulder, so this thing is huge. It sniffs the ground, does a few circles, and then hops the fence into the backyard like it's nothing. It walks over to the window and again gets nose to the glass like it's trying to see in. We are panicking the whole time. Well, my brother is like, "Fudge this," and soon as he steps off the bed, we hear this loud bang, and there is a flash of light. The thing at the windows gets knocked sideways, and without even missing a beat, it turns and runs across the full length of backyard, jumps the back chain link fence. It cleared the fence, the alleyway, and then landed in the back neighbor's yard. This is easily a 15-20-foot jump minimum, clearing their fence like it was nothing, and was gone at a dead run, up beside that house and off into the darkness on the other side. My dad comes tearing around the side of the house with his shotgun in hand and makes a mad dash for the side door and slams it shut behind him. He is screaming and hollering, "We gotta go." We pack up and head to a hotel that night. My mom absolutely refused to believe we saw what we said we saw, and we only lived there for about 6 months. It rattled my dad so much, he didn't even want to come back. He told my mom that we were just going to move that next day, but she wouldn't allow it. After about 6 months, she conceded, and we moved. Mind you, this is in the coastal plains region of Texas. We have no large wild canines here. We have stray dogs and coyotes, but nothing that would even remotely touch on how big this thing was. My dad swears he shot that thing with a slug from about 15 feet away with his 12-gauge shotgun right underneath its left arm, hitting it in the ribs where its vital organs are, and nothing, it just ran off. He said the thing that freaked him out the most was that when he saw the thing jump the fence, it walked towards our window, crouched but still on its hind legs. It wasn't walking on all fours, and then when it got to our window, it stood up straighter, and he could tell that while it looked like a dog, its body was shaped wrong. He said it looked like a really stocky person wearing a dog suit, but he could tell it wasn't a suit. Also that when it was walking in circles, sniffing the ground before coming into our yard the second time, it wasn't actually sniffing the ground like for a scent. It was staring at our window with its face to the ground like it was acting like it was sniffing the ground, almost as if it was playing a part to see if anyone would notice it. He said he's had dogs his whole life, and everything about what it was doing was wrong. A while later, I asked my dad why he was in the backyard if he thought I was having a nightmare, and he told me my brother is the one that gave it away. He said with how panicked I looked that my brother was almost white as a sheet and wouldn't take his eyes off the window. He said, "Your brother D has never looked so scared and never been one with just making stuff up." So after going back to his room with my mom as he was laying there thinking about it, he decided that if my brother was a white as he was, then we had to have seen something. So he grabbed his gun in case he had to scare some creeper out of our yard and figured he was going to go through the garage and out by the far side of the house and sneak to the corner to see if someone was peeking in our windows, or if someone was actually messing with us. He never actually thought we saw a huge dog-looking thing, just that maybe with it being dark outside and us being kids with overactive imaginations, maybe we just mistook someone as something. But when he saw that thing come up the side fence and with the street light in the back alley lighting up the backyard, he saw it, and it freaked him out. He was going to creep back inside until it went up to our window, and he said, it stood up. He just got this instant feeling of just dread, like something was going to happen to us. Answer, Dogman. There is a famous video of a person live streaming on Facebook about the creepy thing they've been seeing begin their house. And as they're filming, you see the figure of a large creature, almost as tall as the light pole you pass under the street lamp. Chilling footage. You should check it out and see if it looks like what you saw. Link to the Reddit post with the video. Story 4. I went to college in Providence, RI. My dorm room was my roommate and I, with beds opposite sides of the room and desks by the foot of the bed, the usual dorm setup. Anyway, my boyfriend and I were hanging out in my room one day and he was laying on my bed. I was up next to the bed and bent over to grab something. I heard him scream and freak out, holding his eyes, not exaggerating, and he wouldn't tell me why. Eventually, he tells me that when I bent over, he saw a shadow behind me that actually kind of looked like him, and it freaked him out. He had an afro, so the silhouette would have been pretty distinctive. We didn't really talk about it afterwards and never told my roommate. She was in the room. A couple of weeks later, I'm asleep in bed with my boyfriend. I wake up in the middle of the night to my roommate packing a bag, clearly panicked. She kind of rushed out of the room and didn't see me awake, so I didn't say anything. The next morning, I see her and ask her why she rushed out of the room in the middle of the night. She then tells me she woke up in my middle of the night and saw my boyfriend sitting at my desk and asked him why he was up. She then saw my boyfriend sleeping next to me. She believed in ghost stuff, so she freaked and left. It really freaked me out because we hadn't mentioned the look-alike my boyfriend saw to her, and it sounded like she saw the same figure. Living in RI made me see some weird shit. Story 5. The basement in my dad's house is finished except for the storage room, which is really dark and creepy and is around the corner from the main room of the basement. There's an elliptical down there, and when standing on the elliptical, if you look over your shoulder, you can see half of the door to the storage room. I was working out on said elliptical, and I felt like someone was standing behind me. So I looked over my shoulder, and in that half doorway, a dark figure with light gray eyes was standing there looking at me. I was house sitting, so I know there wasn't anyone else home. I slowly got off the elliptical and went into the bathroom to hide. Then a while later decided to be bold and rushed past the storage room and back upstairs. Not the first time I had seen that gray-eyed figure either. Story 6. My very first job was as a radio DJ at a small hometown radio station in the mid-1990s. This was a tiny building out in the middle of a field with a 500-feet antenna out back in a single road from the main road to the front door. The transmitter was right behind my studio, behind sound dampening glass, and had a light bulb that was always on. The station was so small that you could see the light bulb in the transmitter room all the way from the driveway roadway. There were only two doors, the front door and the back door in the transmitter room. That door didn't even have a handle on the outside, and it was always locked from the inside. It's impossible to enter that door from the outside. I worked the evening shift from 5 p.m. 10 p.m. After my shift, we actually went off the air for the night. I was always the last person there. So after I went off the air, I had to pull commercials for the first hour or two of the morning show, clean dishes, finish up some production work, etc. After working there for a year or so, I had racked up a couple of weird experiences. Shadows scurrying about at the corner of my vision, lights turning off and on. One evening after getting in and taking over the board, I was just sitting there preparing myself mentally for the next 5 hours. I looked up, out the studio doors towards the front door, and I saw the perfect shadow shape of a man who was probably 6 feet tall. It was there, then not. I went to my boss, who was not a nice person on her nicest days, and said, "So, I have a weird question." She sighed and looked at me, expecting who knows what. "Have you ever felt like someone was here who wasn't?" My boss yelled across the building for someone to come into her office. When that person arrived, she tilted her head at me. "He's seen Jimmy." Supposedly, everyone had seen Jimmy, the original owner of the radio station. "He popped in from time to time. He won't hurt you. He's just checking in on the station." So from then on, Jimmy would make his appearances. His was a harmless presence. My studio faced another unused studio, and he would flash the lights on and off a few times. I'd say, "Hi, Jimmy. Everything's going well," and it would stop. He turned a water faucet on once. He whispered my name in my ear one night, which freaked me out. At least I think it was him. You see, there was another malevolent being that also lived there at the station. It didn't have a name, and it was about shin high. This one always gave me a really bad feeling. It was the one who would dart beside me, its shadow just in the corner of my eye. I always knew it was there, just because I would feel downright freaked out. One night in particular was the scariest I've ever been. Here it is, 30-ish or so years later, and I still can't explain it. As soon as everyone left the building for the night, I got that feeling like it was there. I just turned on all the lights, turned the music up, and tried to ignore it. The longer the night went on, though, the worse it got. Lights were flashing everywhere. A dot matrix printer in the sales office started going on its own. Something that never happened. and that office was locked. Then ceiling tiles starting moving up as if someone hit them with a broom handle. They started closest to me from my studio, down the hall, and ended at the front door, which was locked. Then the front door opened. A locked fudge door opened. I went down the hall to close and relock it. When I did, I saw through the door window that there was a coffee cup and a cigar on the front stoop. There was no reason for them to be there. On my way back to the studio, I got a big burst of cigar smell, like an invisible smoke cloud, right in my face. I knew my usual duties were required, but I didn't care at this point. I went off the air, grabbed my keys, and noped right the fudge out of there. I ran to my car, backed up, and looked through the front door. A figure was standing inside, silhouetted in front of the transmitter light. I peeled out and went straight home. Now, all of that is screwy, but it's not the most unexplainable thing. Is it 100 impossible someone didn't somehow sneak in and play a very elaborate prank on me? No, there's a slight, minuscule chance someone did, but to this day, I don't know how. It was an old, tiny building, but I still hold the possibility that it could have been a prank. I got home and told my mom this whole story. My heart was still pounding. She was all shooey, well, it's bedtime. So I go to my bedroom and dial up a BBS to write someone what had happened to me. As I was typing up the story, my modem speaker turned on. If you are old enough to remember dial-up modems, you know the speaker doesn't just turn on once the connection is made. They wouldn't even turn back on if someone in the house picked up the phone. You'd just get a lot of bad data on the screen and your modem would disconnect. The speaker turns on and a voice comes from the speaker mixed with the static of the data connection. It screeched, "Help me!" The speaker then turned off and nothing else changed on my screen. That speaker turning on and the voice coming out is solidified in my brain. I remember the screech like it was yesterday. I have no explanation for it. My mom was the only other person in the house, and she wouldn't have done something like that. She couldn't have done something like that. It was the scariest night of my life. I am as skeptical as you can be about anything ghost or UFO related, but that night is beyond my ability to explain. As kind of a footnote to all of this, I go back to that station every now and then when I go home to visit. I still know some people who work there. Jimmy is still active and is well known by the staff. The little scary one, no one else has reported seeing him. Story 7, copied from an old comment of mine. At one of my previous sysadmin jobs, we were closing down one of our smaller data centers as it was being consolidated into one of our larger ones, but we still had to have at least one person there in case of server issues that had to be dealt with on site. We rotated each week on which one of us would do the overnights there. The place was reportedly haunted by what I have no idea, just heard rumors from other coworkers when I hired in. So imagine a relatively large open office space that is completely void of all the cubicles, desks, etc. that are normally there, with just one desk and a few random cables hanging from the ceiling. Also, just the lights over my desk were working and bleeding out into my surroundings by about 3 feet. That was where I was for the week, LOL. I remember sitting there and just hearing ambient noise from the sort of far-off server room, fans, cooling system, etc., working on a server for a customer of ours, and seeing something dart across the room in my peripheral vision. I looked up and didn't see anything, so figured my eyes were just tired from the screen light and making me see like those floaties when your eyes close too tightly. Went back to work, and then about 5 minutes later, I saw it again. Although this time I heard the bathroom door might have opened and shut, big jerk, heavy door you pulled open, and the mechanism at top of door pulled it shut. Thought maybe one of my coworkers was here for a server fix, so got up and went to greet them and wait for them. About 10 minutes pass and no one comes out of the bathroom. I go in to make sure they're not passed out or hurt. One of my coworkers suffered from seizures, but lo and behold, empty bathroom. Now I'm creeped out. Leave the bathroom and this time see the shadow person thing on the other side of the room dart across again, but looking at it straight on and not from my peripheral vision. Quickly went over and threw the rest of the lights on and started searching the whole office and server room for a coworker, as I was 100% sure they were fudge with me. Never found anyone. Rest of the night was uneventful, as well as the rest of the week, minus me basically shoot bricks sitting at my desk waiting for something else to happen. Story 8. I've shared this story on Reddit before, and I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's not exactly a scary thing I saw, but I still wonder about it all the time. So I'll copy and paste here. My best friend and I would always talk about crazy dreams we had. Never thought much of it until he told me about one where he got hit by a car and died. We were about 15, 16 when he told me about the dream. We were into conspiracies, stuff like aliens, paranormal, lucid dreaming, so we talk about stuff like that a lot. and he died right before he would have turned 20. He said he was riding a skateboard wearing all black when the car hit him and could see everyone at his funeral. He even said his crush was at his funeral and laughed about it. He just kept going on about how it was so real, and it really shook me up until eventually I forgot about it. Then a few years later, after Ed long forgot about the dream he told me about, it happened for real. His crush was at his funeral. He did get hit by a car and die. He was wearing all black, like in the dream, his work clothes, and he was riding my skateboard. It was all true. I still don't know what to make of it all. Every single detail I remember from his dream came true, and I'm sure there's parts of it he told me that I don't remember. I felt crazy. I didn't tell anyone about. I just don't know why or how he saw it happen in his dream, and think, what if he never told me about it? It just left me with so many questions. But I guess now I have proof, at least to myself, that our souls go on after we die. I just wish I knew why he experienced that dream and told me about it. Like there had to be some kind of reason. I just think about how I wouldn't believe this story if I hadn't experienced it for myself. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? Answer: my grandfather had a very vivid dream about a plane crashing into houses near Midway Airport in Chicago. In the dream, he was one of the first people at the crash site, and he pulled open the door to find that the captain had been decapitated. The next morning, he mentioned the dream to the rest of the family, and they all joked how it sure would be terrible because they lived right by there. A few weeks later, TWA Flight 595 crashed into homes outside Midway. It was 5:30 in the morning, so my grandpa was on his way to work, but there wasn't a ton of other people out yet, so he ended up being one of the first on the scene. When he went to see if anyone needed help, he found the decapitated pilot in the cockpit. I can't verify now that that's how the pilot died, but the Chicago Tribune described burning gasoline running in roof gutters, a mother screaming for her babies, and firefighters collecting human limbs, so it doesn't seem too far off. Like sure, enough people have enough dreams that just by chance, some of them might end up sort of happening, but the specificity of the details and the fact that he had told multiple family members about it beforehand, who all also remember this story, always freaked him and me out. Story 9. There was this abandoned house in the middle of nowhere, like 30 minutes of back roads to find it, and no other people for at least 10 miles in any direction. Me and some friends used to go check out this spooky house and showed off to 1 or 2 new folks at a time. We did this 3 or 4 times, and as we're pulling up one night, a light in the house turned on. The house didn't have power anytime we'd been there, and there were no vehicles anywhere around the house that night. Scared us all to the point none of us ever went back. In retrospect, it was probably being used as a hunting cabin or meth house, although there was never any indication of either that we saw. And they probably just had the breaker off when they weren't there. A car could have been parked behind in a place we couldn't see from the road, but as high school kids, nope. Spooky house with unexplained lights. Answer: me and a few friends knew of a house like this in my area. The story of it is actually really sad. We went in it one night. The place was giant, and there were stains all over the carpet like someone had been rapidly puking everywhere. The most notable thing was one of the upstairs bedrooms. We opened the door, and an entire wall was covered in a mural of Sonic the Hedgehog in a green theme with pot leaves for hair that said underneath in big green letters, "Chronic the Hemp Hog." Story 10. I've been reading this thread and like 2 hours mysteriously vanished. That's all I got. Thanks for all the creepy stories. I love it. Story 11. I was on a cruise with a friend. We shared a cabin. Friend was a really loud snorer. He would usually stay awake until he'd fallen asleep. Otherwise, they'd find it impossible to sleep with the racket he was making. That night, he'd had a few drinks and passed out tipsy, snoring loudly. Didn't bother me, as I had my book to read. It's about 2 a.m. and I'm wide awake, reading my book in bed. I get this feeling that there's something at the foot of the bed. I glance up, and there is this thing. It looks like a person, but translucent and gray, and the features are blurry. A bit like if a person was made of television static. I feel as if it is being inquisitive, like how a young child would watch you do something. I asked it in my head what it wanted, and as I did, it turned and walked across the room to the door. As it did, it disappeared. I didn't feel scared or threatened by it. No idea what it was. I don't drink or take substances, so it wasn't that, and I was wide awake. Odd, really odd. Really? Answer: yours is not the only story I've read about people seeing a person looking as though she were made of static. I've read that some people believe they are aliens, some people believe they are ghosts, some people believe they are interdimensional travelers, some people believe they are time travelers from the future. What do you think the one you saw was? When you mentally asked it what it wanted, did it answer in any way? Story 12. When I was a kid, my grandpa was the night shift custodian of a big old school church building. My sister and I used to go with him some nights because they had a big gymnasium type room with a ton of big exercise balls and stuff, and it was fun to run around. One night, while my grandpa was locking up a room, my sister and I heard a noise down the stairs behind us. We looked, and there was an old lady leaving the building. She turns, looks at us, does the shh motion with her finger to her lips, and leaves. We don't think too much of it at the time. We go to my grandpa and ask him if there was anyone else here tonight, like any meetings, classes, etc., and he says, nah, it's just us in the entire building. We ask him where the door down the stairs leads, and he says, oh, that goes out to the cemetery. My sister and I freaked out. We still talk about it to this day and have the same memory of it. Story 13. Once I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I could see the outline of someone standing there, but when I turned on the light, there was no one there. The door was still slowly closing, as if whoever or whatever had been there was leaving. Even creepier, my Nest fire alarm had illuminated in the corridor, sensing movement, but there was nobody there. Still gives me chills thinking about it. Answer: I had a creepy situation happen when I was young. My parents left to go out shopping for some tools. I was probably in 8th grade at the time when they left. I distinctly remember them telling me that there were people working on our AC and that they should finish up before they got home. Well, I was playing, I think, COD 4 at the time when I heard what sounded like pool balls banging together downstairs. Weird, but I thought, oh, well, maybe the AC guys found the pool table in basement and were just messing around. So I thought nothing of it. But it continued to happen for a little while, so I decided to just go investigate. As I'm walking down the stairs, I noticed that the basement door is only partially open and that the lights are completely off and that the AC guys are gone. My heart completely sank when I opened the basement door a little further. I don't know how to explain it, but it genuinely felt like I was staring down into that dark basement and that something or someone was looking back at me. I lost my chute and called my parents in tears at what had just transpired. Story 14. When I was 9 years old, I was biking home in the evening. We lived in the countryside up a small mountain. The road from the village was an uphill, a flat section, and then another uphill. The road lights only stretched to the end of the flat section. I was a bit afraid of the dark, so I stopped at the end of the road lights, just at the bottom of the last uphill, to gather courage to bike the last section home. It was a partial moon, so it wasn't pitch black, and at the end of the uphill, I saw a figure walking down towards me. I thought I'd wait until she got closer, as I would feel less afraid to bike in the dark if there was someone else close. But about halfway down the hill, the person walked into a thin shadow of a tree on the road and never came back out, just disappeared. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what I just saw, and then panicked and biked down to the village and stayed there until my parents came driving and wondered why I never came home. They tried to explain it with stuff like the person might have gone into the woods or something. What they didn't disclose, though, out of fear that I'd never dare to bike home again, was that my father had seen the same thing walking home from work. He had seen her clear as day, walking down the hill for a while. When he looked down for just a second and looked up, she was gone, and there were no footsteps in the fresh snow. I later read a book about local legends, and apparently a lot of people during at least a century have seen her walking down the hill and disappearing halfway down. My youngest daughter loved this story, so we've been on ghost stakeouts, where we buy pizzas and snacks and hang out at the bottom of the hill, listening to the Ghostbusters theme song and try to see the ghost. Answer: had a similar incident. Many moons ago, I was sitting on the porch of our house with my wife at the time. The house was on an intersection, so you could see straight down the street from the front porch. The neighborhood was semi-rural. It was mostly mobile and prefab homes on quarter-acre plots. There were streetlights, but it wasn't exactly well lit. We were sitting out front, and I see someone walking down the street towards us. He was a white dude in jeans and a wife beater. He's about 50 to 75 yards away, and he walks into a shadow cast by a willow blocking the street lamp. He doesn't reappear on the near side of the shadow, so I'm kind of watching. The stretch of darkened road is only about 20 foot, so it shouldn't take him that long. He was bebopping along at a steady clip. Then I see a white dog with black spots walk out of the shadow, but perpendicular away from the street, towards that house. It's got its tail between its legs and is turning, and it's looking in my direction. It's doing that crawl slink like it's just shoot on your living room floor. It eventually disappeared into the darkness of the yard. We just kind of sat there for a few more minutes wondering what the fudge we just saw. The guy never came out, and my wife was freaked out enough. She had us go inside and close the curtains. Haha. Story 15. Once when I was around 12, I was riding my bike on the trails near a golf course. There's high-tension power lines going through the park, so a clearing runs through the forest. A car pulled through the clearing, and I noticed the back seat is full, but only the driver up front. They stop, everyone gets out, and they drag a guy screaming out of the back seat, beat him up a bit, and shot him twice. Once in the gut for pain and suffering, I suppose, and once in the head. They stuff the dead guy back in the back seat. Everyone piles back into the car just as before, and off they go. I stayed hidden in the brush, dumbfounded and scared to passing, until they were out of sight. I go over to where the car had been. No mess at all, just tire tracks and footprints, like it hadn't actually happened. I rode home and didn't tell anyone what I saw. After supper, everyone got into whatever they were doing, so I went to my parents' BR to use the phone, called 911 to report it, told them I wanted to remain anonymous. They thanked me for the report and I hung up. Never heard anything about it on the news. They must have done a good job getting rid of the body, but I still find it weird that I couldn't see any remnants of what I'd just seen right in front of my own eyes. So I've had this memory of watching a man take down for close to 40 years now, and I think it has influenced my outlook on everything. Story 16. About 25 years ago, my now former wife and I were caretaking a house. We had been there for several weeks, and we both noticed that we always had that feeling coming up the stairs from the cellar that something was going to grab you as soon as you turn the light switch off. Everything else about the house was normal. We slept with an analog wind-up alarm clock next to the bed, the kind that actually ticks. To set the alarm, you move a tiny third hand to the location on the clock face for the desired time. For example, halfway between 6 and 7 to awaken at 6:30. It's a physical process, and there is very little way to get it wrong. We always had the clock set to wake us up at 6 a.m. It was not something we fiddled with on a daily basis. One night, the alarm clock went off at like 2 in the morning, old school ringing bells. Both my former wife and I woke up absolutely terrified. I saw a small figure, maybe 2 feet tall, run out of the room. I thought I must have been crazy until my former wife screamed, "Did you just see that thing?" We both described it as some sort of small gremlin. When we looked at the alarm clock, we saw that the alarm hand had been moved from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. That's the whole story. Scared the fudge out of me. Have no explanation for it. Nothing else ever happened there, but the cellar feeling persisted. Answer: while very scary to experience, I'm sure, the idea of some supernatural creature or spirit spending weeks trying to manifest, making the basement feel all spooky, then finally succeeding at crossing over to the physical world. And the thing it does is go into your room to play a prank of moving your alarm clock up a few hours before disappearing forever again is very funny. Story 17. So in college, I studied in the UK. I lived in a house with a group of other American students that had stories of the ghost of a girl who passed away while living there. I never believed in any of it, but it was fun to play along. The kitchen had one way in and out, and right after you entered the kitchen to your right was a padlocked door to the cellar where she allegedly lived. I had the only key. We were all a little homesick near Thanksgiving, so decided to do a meal together. This required some creative cooking schedules due to small appliances in the kitchen. So one girl who didn't have class the next day offered to stay up late to get the turkey going. We went into the cellar the first and only time that evening to get larger cooking implements. At 2:04 in the morning, I wake up to my door rattling like someone was pushing against it. I assumed it was a housemate who just went to the wrong door. About 30 seconds later, when I hear a scratchy female voice softly saying hello, every 5 seconds or so, my window was open, and it sounded like it was coming from outside. So I get up to close my window as I assume it's some tipsy girl walking back from the pub. I get to the window, and there's no one there. And then I hear hello. Clear as a bell behind me, my door rattles again and goes silent. I've had night terrors before and hallucinate when I have even a mild fever. So I assume I'm still asleep and lay back down. The next morning at 7 a.m., the girl who's cooking tells me I had the creepiest night. At 1:50, I heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. Then the door rattled. Then at 2:10, the door rattled again and I heard footsteps coming down. She told me this before I had said anything to anyone about what I'd experienced. Story 18. My mom and I were driving up from Texas to Washington in late October. We stopped to rest in this national park in southern Colorado, and we're pretty much the only people there. It was usually daylight when we stopped to rest because my mom preferred driving at night. We were sitting there making something to eat when this guy on a bicycle went past us and just glared at us with these dislike-filled eyes. My mom and I were pretty creeped out by him, but went on about our business and then laid down in the car to sleep, her up front and my boxer and I in the back seat. I got this feeling like I was being watched, and then my dog's hackles went up, and she started this really deep down kind of growl. She only ever made that growl when she was really bothered by something. I reached over and chambered around in my shotgun, and my mom heard me and said, "Hey, are you awake? Do you want to get out of here?" And I said, "Hell yeah, I do." We got up, and I stood guard with my shotgun and the dog. When she packed everything into the car and we left, we couldn't see him, but we could both feel him watch us, and the dog didn't settle down again until we'd left that place far behind. We made a beeline for Moab and stopped at this truck stop to rest instead. When we got up, we went in and got something to eat and met this really friendly trucker and told him what happened. He shadowed us north for quite a ways and then handed us off to other truckers. They shadowed us all the way to Idaho. They were all a great bunch of guys for sure. Story 19. I was maybe 10 years old and my grandma had just died. I didn't really know her because she had spent most of my young life in a nursing home and often didn't remember who I was when I went to visit. But when I visited, she would always rub my back. It was sort of like an instinctual comfort thing. She did it to all her kids and grandkids. For about a year after she died, I would be sitting in my room at night alone and start to feel someone rubbing my back like she used to. It freaked me out until one night when I acknowledged it and said, "Thank you, Grandma." It stopped after that and I never felt it again. Answer: my mom died a couple years ago, and I was staying with my dad at their house for a few months to look after him, sleeping in her bed. Every night for months, as soon as I laid down, I'd feel someone sit down on the side of the bed. I knew it was her, and it didn't bother me. I'd cry myself to sleep because I missed her so much. Sometimes I'd talk out loud to her. Eventually, it stopped happening. I miss it, TBH. Story 20. I was about to cross the street. A lady put her arm across my chest and said, "Wait." As I look at her, trying to figure out what is going on, a car crash happens, and one of the cars goes tumbling down the street 2 feet in front of me. If she hadn't stopped me, I would absolutely be dead. I turned to look at her again, and she is no longer there. I could see for blocks in each direction, know where she could have gone that fast where I wouldn't be able to see her. Only thing I can come up with is I imagined it happening in my memory due to how tragic the crash was. Never experienced anything even slightly supernatural before or after. Answer: there is an effect in times where you may die, where a seemingly very real person appears near you and gives you advice. Usually they disappear almost immediately after. It's very common for hikers climbing large, dangerous mountains. They will see some other hiker warning them that it would be dangerous or that they will die, and then they disappear seconds later. You may have experienced that. Story 21. Roughly 15 years ago, I was in upstate NY with my uncle at our family house. It's pretty quiet and not a lot of people are up there. My uncle and I were outside when it started to downpour, so we went inside. We were looking out the front door together, and my uncle was commenting how hard it was raining. This is also pretty rural, so it's mostly pitch black out, with only our front house light illuminating the front area. As we are looking out the door, we both see someone on the road sort of speed walking. It's so dark, but their skin was so pale we can see their hands sway as they walked, and then their face as they turned towards our house. All I remember was the face had no eyes. My uncle quickly shut the door and said not to worry. It was probably someone who got out stuck in the rain. I was scared, but he calmed me down. I was little, so I don't remember too much after that, other than my uncle keeping watch for a while after that. I forgot about this story until years later when I brought it up to him because I thought maybe it was a dream. His attitude changed when I brought it up, and he just said he remembered, but didn't want to talk about it. I have never brought it back up to him, and to this day now, when I think about it, I feel really eerie. Answer: there is a legendary green faceless man, or something similar to that. He is a guy who, well, as the name suggests, has such a pale skin it seems greenish, and no facial features. People only saw him in remote spots late at night. Turned out, it was just a normal guy who lived in the area. He would get his exercise and fresh air at night in quiet spots to avoid being seen because ever since he got his face burned off from being electrocuted, I forget how, the sight of him would upset passersby. So he would walk along a quiet rural road at 3 a.m. or something to try not to cause drama, and still he was spotted and it caused drama. Oopsie, lol. As for being so pale, that came from staying indoors during daylight to avoid being gawked at and to avoid sunburn to his sensitive scar tissue. I wonder if you live where he does. Story 22. It's not scary, but unexplainable. When I was 10, I got into a motorcycle accident. I wasn't driving it. I was walking from school when a motorcycle hit me going full speed. I did see the motorcycle come, but I froze up and couldn't move. When it had hit me, I flew pretty far and remember someone catching me when I fell down. When I got up and looked around, I didn't see anyone, and witnesses told the cops I flew at least 6 feet and fell headfirst on the ground. My head was fine, just had a broken collarbone. Thankfully, my parents believed me when I told them. Answer: I knew a fellow in college. He took a bunch of mushrooms, and there was a highway intersecting the area Buddy lived in and the school. People would cut across. A bunch of students were cutting across, and Buddy stepped right in front of a full-size transport truck. It hit him and threw him about 80 feet. Everyone screamed and started to freak out. Buddy got up, and he was uninjured. He successfully eliminated himself a year later. Story 23. My friend and I were driving from a gig we played in Kona on the big island of Hawaii. We were driving on Saddle Road, one of two roads from Kona to the other side of the island to Hilo Town. Saddle Road is known for being a spiritual place and lots of weird things there. This stretch of land is about 40 kilo with no lights or population, just lava rock. We drove over the road about 1 a.m. We were talking stories and having a good time. Then we saw on the side of the road a huge white dog wearing a gold chain staring at us. We passed and asked if we saw the same thing. We were debating about stopping on the side of the road to pick it up. The local legend is that if you see an old lady on the road, you need to pick her up or something bad will happen. We didn't stop and didn't speak until we got home. I asked another local guy what could that have been. He said it was the goddess Pele's pet. Did some research. Looks like this dog has been seen sporadically since the 1950s. Answer: was driving on the Saddle Road to Hilo after a canoe race. It's dark with enough moon to see the landscape. I have 3 other teammates in the car with me. We get to the part where it's all lava on each side where you can see top of Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. Suddenly the car dies. No electricity, no engine, nothing. It just stops, lights out, nothing. I coast to the side of the road. It was incredibly eerie and so quiet. Usually there is some sort of noise. It's windy up there. It's dead still. I get out and think maybe a battery terminal came loose. Nope. Battery looks great. I get in and try to start the car. It's just dead. We sit there for a while hoping to maybe flag down a car, something. But it's super late, way past midnight. Suddenly one of my teammates remembers she has bananas in her backpack. Pork bananas are considered sacred to the Hawaiian gods. She grabs them, walks several feet onto the lava, and we follow her. We all apologize to Pele, ask for her forgiveness. We decide to all leave offerings to her. We ask Pele for safe passage and thank her. We get back into the car. I turn the key and it starts up, no problem. We go on our way. Story 24. Working in a nursing home for years during the night, and everyone always complained of weird stuff like noises on the top floor. I never believe in any of that, so I was always the one going upstairs to do night checks. One night, I was changing a resident on that floor with a colleague, and my colleague complained he heard something like people walking. We were in the resident room, and I had to go to the cupboard at the end of that corridor to get bed sheets. And when I was coming back with the bed sheets, I kept hearing steps and like if someone was touching and opening plastic bags. I was so annoyed and looked outside the room and saw a shadow passing the corridor. The issue is that the shadow was so big, like if literally a person just passed by along with step noises and plastic bags. I freak out so badly and froze completely. I had to call another colleague to come upstairs because I was so scared of coming out of the resident room. Bear in mind that I do not believe in those things, and for 2 years I was always the one doing night checks on the top floor and bottom floor on my own. Never had any problem and never saw something. Since that day, I never went upstairs alone and was always very scared. Answer: I have encountered a lot of strange things working at nursing homes too. My first job was in a nursing home that used to be a hospital. The old morgue was in the basement, but the door had been permanently locked since they converted it into the nursing home. The one time I had to walk by it on night shift, it was open when I walked back past it. Very unsettling. Story 25. This isn't my story, it's my uncle's. A bit of backstory: he used to work on the London Underground doing maintenance to the tracks, tunnels, etc. Once he went into a tunnel with 2 other colleagues. They'd stopped to do something, and this man said to my uncle like, "Hey, uncle's name, can you show me the way out?" My uncle, thinking it was one of his guys, said, "You know the way out." I think he was so engrossed in his work that he didn't turn around to see this bloke to start with. So this guy says, "I'm so cold." Then my uncle said he immediately felt dead cold, and the air around him dropped. Not sure what he meant by that. So my uncle turns around and shines a light on him. My uncle said to me, this bloke is what he would call a ghost. Standing there, he was holding a really old vintage lamp and wearing a really old dirty uniform. He said the feeling he got was so strange, as if he knew this bloke was a ghost. The bloke just kept saying over and over again, "I'm so cold. I'm so cold." My uncle eventually said to this guy, "I don't think you're supposed to be here, mate. Can you see a light anywhere?" And he looked dead at my uncle and said, "Can you help me? I'm so cold." I'm unsure if the colleagues came to see who my uncle was talking to, but one of them tried to approach this bloke thinking it was someone in their team playing a joke, and this bloke just disappeared right in front of their eyes. All of them freaked out and ran. They refused to go back into the tunnel. My uncle and 2 colleagues refused to go down that tunnel again. Some other colleagues have said they've seen this bloke and he always says how cold he is. My uncle's retired now, but says he thinks of this bloke from time to time. Answer: you should watch the documentary Ghosts on the Underground, if you haven't already, free on YouTube. There's a story in there very similar to your uncle's. Honestly, in my opinion, it's one of the best paranormal documentaries of all time. No ghost footage, no SFX, just real people telling real stories. The soundtrack is absolutely fantastic too. Story 26. My grandfather had just died a few days earlier, and my mom was crying one night in our kitchen. I started hugging her. We had a lot of my grandfather's belongings, but there was this broken radio that didn't even have working batteries in it on the table, along with other things like photos and clothes he previously owned. This is the only unexplainable thing I've ever experienced. But while my mom was bawling, crying, the radio made a very loud static noise for about a second. We both stared in silence at it. It was eerie. She stopped crying because even she heard it. We both just went to bed after that and haven't spoke of it since. I'd imagine if it was something paranormal, it was my grandfather letting us know he's here, but who knows? Answer: the day before my grandfather died, he told my brother and I that he'll be waiting at the bar to buy us a beer in the future. Skip ahead to about a month after his passing, and had a very short, felt like 10 seconds, very vivid dream of me walking into a bar I didn't recognize, and my grandpa being at the bar. He spun the chair around and had a beer in each hand. He just said, "You guys ready for that beer?" I looked right and my brother was standing next to me. I snapped awake so fast I scared the crap out of my wife and dog. I'm just panting, breathing, and freaked out. I went to check my phone to see what time it was, and as I picked it up, I got a text from my brother saying, "Hey, I just had a fudge up dream." Yeah, same dream. Story 27. I might have something for this. When I was young, probably around 10 or so, maybe younger, I was at a family wedding. It was late in the evening, so a full moon was out and it was getting darker. Me and my cousin, who's a year younger, were swinging on this big metal gate thing outside the venue. It was on the entrance to a very, very big field. We noticed a guy very far into the field who was just glowing and radiating white. I mean, his skin, clothes, everything. I remember us standing there like WTF. Then we tried to get his attention and shout at him. He stopped, looked in our direction, but he stopped right under the full moon and pointed up towards the moon while staring at us. We were just in shock and confusion pretty much. After about 10 seconds of pointing, he carried on walking across the field and just disappeared behind a swing set. Even till this day, I have no idea what that was. I'm hoping it was some costume or something, but sure didn't look like it. Answer: I have a person in white story too. Me and my cousins were no older than 7-12. There was a house that looked old and vacant, but never looked like it was falling apart, and windows were always closed. Their yard had a very broken fence with very large chunks missing that had a garden and a swing set. The garden is what stood out to me most because there was always yellow and white flowers growing out of it, and it was changed seasonally and maintained. We would walk through the fence and hang out at the swing set a lot, and no one ever bothered us. One day as we're passing the house on the street, there was a woman in white, just as you described. She was wearing all white, but I couldn't really identify hay clothes she was wearing. Her hair was white and her skin was white. Not Caucasian, she was like a walking porcelain statue that shimmered in the sunlight as we passed that broken gate. She was raking leaves and took no notice to us as we all audibly had a reaction to it. We ran down the street freaked out, but honestly, it wasn't an imitating presence. It was like we saw something we shouldn't instead of feeling threatened. We talked about it a few times afterwards, but I was always disappointed no one took it more seriously, as I was the youngest one, so my thoughts were often overlooked. We'd mention it when talking about other ghost stuff, and my cousins would be like, "Remember we saw that woman one time who was all white," but never talk about it beyond that. Story 28. Okay, so not something I saw, but something I was told someone else saw. Here's the story. My ex-GF passed away years ago. Before she passed, me and brother lived together, and my brother had a big pit bull named Max. Max was an awesome dog, and she was a big animal lover, and she knew Max very well. I eventually moved out. He got a GF who had a kid and needed the space. Okay, that's established. Of note, my ex-GF had long blonde hair, was in her 30s, and she was buried in a pink sweater. A few months after she passed, my brother took them all on a vacation and asked me if I could watch the dog, feed him, etc. I said yes, of course. They kept him crated, and the crate was in his GF's daughter's room, kind of a big basement room. I hung out with the ghost and eventually had to leave, so I put him back in his crate. I felt bad, but I had to. Before I left, I looked up the sky and said, "Meg, if you're still around, please keep Max company. He's going to be lonely." So I go home. My brother comes back, whatever. A few months later, I'm talking to his GF in her 30s, and we're talking about ghost stuff. She tells me that her house is haunted. I'm like, no way. I'm there all the time. I've never seen anything. She explains to me that it seemed to happen out of nowhere. She hadn't seen anything, but her daughter, around 5 or 6 years old, told her that sometimes when Max is barking or freaking out for whatever reason, her daughter tells her she sees a lady about mommy's age with long blonde hair wearing a pink sweater who calms down the dog. I'm pretty sure I invited a ghost in their house, but I'm darn happy that I did. I wish I could have seen her. Answer: man, this reminds me of my own story. I'm sure I've told it on Reddit before, but to preface, my best friend died in late 2012. This happened in early-ish 2013. I was working retail and we had a new employee, a South American guy about my age. Didn't really know him well, but on one shared break, we got to talking and somehow we landed on all things supernatural. He hesitated, but eventually told me he could see spirits and often saw one particular spirit following me around. He then proceeded to describe my best friend to a fudge tea. And just to make clear, he didn't know me. I had not told him about my best friend. We were not following each other on social media, and all of my profiles are private anyway. There is literally no way he could have known what she looked like, and my best friend's look was pretty unique. It didn't really scare me, though. I think it's pretty neat if she truly is watching over me, just chilling. Story 29. I had a dog growing up that was the smartest dog I've ever met. She was like a human trapped in a dog's body. My brother and I found her wandering around our neighborhood after school, and we brought her home. She was beloved. My brother died young. After he died, she would walk slowly in a circle around a plant we had in the living room, letting the leaves that hung down gently rub her back. Every once in a while, she would stop and look up at the plant for a moment, like she saw some kind of apparition floating above the plant. She would get a sad look in her eyes and let out a whimper. I'm convinced she was seeing my brother's ghost watching over us. I really love that dog. Answer: sounds like she was a sweet girl with a lot of love there. Came into each other's lives at the right moment. Dogs are really so intelligent, and sometimes I truly believe they know more than we do. There's actually a word for the behavior, it appears, you're describing: trancing. Interestingly, another name for it is ghost walking. No one can definitively say why dogs do it. As you said, sensing that presence of your brother, maybe even just seeking comfort as she remembered him. Sorry for your loss. Story 30. Brought home a 3-foot-tall, realistic doll my grandparents had with the intention of fixing it up. I'm scared of dolls, so I put it in a box and put a heavy metal box on top of it. Next morning, the doll was gone. The boxes were still in place, but the darn thing had disappeared completely. I live in fear. Answer: don't be afraid. It's not like the doll is still in the house hiding from you. The odd creaks and groans of an old house are well explained. They're not the sounds of the doll sneaking from one hiding place to another. I mean, even in the worst case, there's no way you'd get a poltergeist scenario where you look under the bed to reassure yourself everything's fine. But instead, the doll is hiding there, and once it sees you seeing it, it attacks you and drags you under the bed. So nothing to worry about. Story 31. I was about 12 at the time. Every year, my parents and I would drive from Montreal to Nova Scotia to visit family. Having always gone the Trans-Canada route, we decided to go through the States for a change. So we ended up going SE through Maine and eventually on to NB, then NS. I remember we were in a very, very remote area, like hadn't seen a house for a long time. This was before GPS and Google Maps. So there was a growing concern in the vehicle that we might run out of gas. I don't remember the name of the road, but it was a country road that had mountain on the right side, went straight up through dense bush. And on the left, it was dense bush. And a steep downhill where I could make out a river at the bottom of the cliff, about a 75 to 100 down the hill. Trees hung over the road. So despite it being a sunny day, the road was shady with the exception of places where the sun would break through. I heard my dad up front ask Mom, "What the fudge is that up ahead?" As I leaned over to look up down the road, we could all see what looked like a man off in the distance on the side of the road. Too far to see color or anything, just a big dark shape standing there as we rolled on down the road. This dude, or whatever it was, crossed the road. Both lanes in, I shot you not 3 to 4 steps. Once on the other side of the road, it's just vanished into the woods. As we got to the spot where he had crossed, Dad slowed right down to look around. Nothing. Not a sight of anyone. No trail. Nothing. No one knows what they saw, but 30 years later, it gets brought up every couple of years, and the feelings are mutual, fucking weird, and creepy. Story 32. When I was 14 years old, I heard the shower at like midnight or some ungodly hour. Assumed it was just Mom. Tried to go back to sleep for ages and couldn't. I just laid there waiting and waiting. Ages went by. I was like, fudge, I better actually go check she hasn't fallen or something. There was no one in there and the shower was just on full. I was terrified. I had to turn it off and just felt dread wash over me. I ran back to my room and just hid in the doorknob. Story 33. Cleaning the house after my mom passed away. She loved body spray. I threw away a nearly empty bottle. I found it in the dishwasher a few days later. Story 34. When Grandpa died, almost all the family was with him around him in the bed. He was 98 and we were waiting doctors because he was suffering. In the night table, we put some candles. Just few seconds after he died, the candle's flames started burning so intense, the high was like 10 times bigger. It was like 10 seconds before the flame came back to normal size. I don't know if it was the soul of Grandpa leaving the body that acted like some kind of combustion. I don't know, but it was weird and with no explanation. All my uncles saw it, but no one's talked about it after that. Story 35. Back in college, me and my girlfriend would go back to her parents' old farmhouse and fool around after class. There was never anybody home. One afternoon, I'm standing in her kitchen, thirstily guzzling a post-intimacy Gatorade. Behind me was a back staircase leading to the second floor of the house. When I finished my drink and turned to leave the room, I noticed a little girl between 7 to 10 YO standing on the bottom step. My first thought was, oh crap, why didn't my girlfriend tell me there was a little girl in the house? I really hope she didn't hear what we were up to. But before I could speak, I realized something was off. She was semi-transparent and oddly two-dimensional in a way I can't articulate. Slowly, I came to the realization that I was staring at a ghost. There was nothing inherently frightening about the experience. Knowing I was in the presence of something unexplainable, I did everything in my power not to blink. I stared at her for the good 10-15 seconds, taking in every detail I could. She had a red and yellow summer dress on, long blonde hair that was tied into a couple of those old-timey braids at the end, black strap shoes. Overall look gave me a 1940s, 1970s vibe. Fortunately for her, she seemed to have no idea I existed. She stood on the bottom step, looking out the back window towards the driveway like she was waiting for someone to arrive. I never took my eyes off her. Eventually, she was just gone. I never believed in ghosts before that. I still don't believe in intelligent hauntings, but I'll certainly entertain the idea of residual energy and echoes of the past. Story 36. Giant blue, almond-shaped, front-facing eyes glowing in the dark through a barbed wire fence. I lived on a forest property in a country with no large predatory animals. This was after huge bushfires, so something that lived in the forest must have been flushed to the outskirts where we lived. Even the insects had gone dead silent, and flight, fight, or freeze instinct was overwhelming. Local indigenous tribe claim I encountered a bunyip. I have no idea what it was, but I've never been so terrified. Story 37. I had a dream when I was about 6 years old. It was of an apartment, and inside was lots of ghosts and horrible, scary creatures. They then dragged me into a room and put me in a bin full of fire. When I turned 10, I moved 200 miles away with my dad to that same apartment from my dream. The fire bin room was my bedroom. That apartment was a literal hell too, as there were loads of substances, addicts, etc. there. Story 38. As a kid, there was a camp that had a lean-to and an old plywood caravan against it, a long way out in the Oss Bush from the town I grew up in. One school holidays, my friends and I went for a bushwalk and stumbled across it. Didn't look like anyone had been there in months, and we looked in the van. Nothing much but moldy seats and a built-in table. Usual old caravan stuff, so we shut the door because it smelt moldy. As we sat in the shade of the lean-to, we heard the doorknob squeak and start turning. Pretty sure my backpack is still sitting there 35 years later because I dropped it and ran. We all scattered in different directions and met up lower down the road an hour later, and we were all still pale. No way anyone was in that van. No way. Still bothers me to this day. Answer: not to negate your experience, but my parents had a little RV with a wonky little knob that would turn back to its original position belatedly. Say you turn the knob, right? Well, it wouldn't immediately go back to its original position. Whatever worn spring mechanism it had would eventually release the tension, and it would spring back into place. It startled us every time. Story 39. My brother and I camped out one night in the Kootenai Mountains in British Columbia. Clear sky, no moon. We could see the Milky Way, Andromeda, and so on. Beautiful night. Just as we were about to bed down, the horses freaked out, panicked and screaming, trying to bolt. A few seconds later, we could see why. A massive jet black shadow, vaguely bird-shaped, flew over us. It blotted out the stars above, It was completely silent, and the wind of its passing stank like putrid, rotted meat. We never saw it again. It took a good half an hour to calm down the horses after it was gone. It was the absolutely most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.